Good evening, and welcome to this third installment of Story Hour, where we will be continuing the marvellous fairy tale of George MacDonald, The Princess and the Goblin. I hope you are sitting comfortably. Maybe you have a mug of hot cocoa with you and you're curled up in a blanket, ready for bedtime with this fantastic story. Last time we left off with Curdie having discovered that the goblins are hatching two plans, evil plans, and we're not quite sure what one of them is yet. At the same time, the Princess Irene's father, the king, has come to visit, and being concerned by the reports of the goblins and also of the lady upstairs, has doubled the guard upon Irene. And so we pick up with chapter 11, titled The Old Lady's Bedroom. Nothing more happened worth telling for some time. The autumn came and went by. There were no more flowers in the garden. The wind blew strong and howled among the rocks. The rain fell and drenched the few yellow and red leaves that could not get off the bare branches. Again and again there would be a glorious morning followed by a pouring afternoon, and sometimes, for a week together, there would be rain, nothing but rain all day, and then the most lovely cloudless night, with the sky all out in full-blown stars, not one missing. But the princess could not see much of them, for she went to bed early. The winter drew on, and she found things growing dreary. When it was too stormy to go out, and she had got tired of her toys, Looty would take her about the house, sometimes to the housekeeper's room, where the housekeeper, who was a good, kind old woman, made much of her, sometimes to the servants' hall or the kitchen, where she was not princess merely, but absolute queen, and ran a great risk of being spoiled. Sometimes she would run off herself to the room where the men-at-arms whom the king had left sat, and they showed her their arms and accoutrements, and did what they could to amuse her. Still, at times she found it very dreary, and often wished that her huge great-grandmother had not been a dream. One morning the nurse left her with the housekeeper for a while. To amuse her, she turned out the contents of an old cabinet upon the table. The little princess found her treasures, queer ancient ornaments, and many things the use of which she could not imagine, far more interesting than her own toys, and sat playing with them for 2 hours or more. But, at length, in handling a curious old-fashioned brooch, she ran the pin of it into her thumb, and gave a little scream with the sharpness of the pain, but would have thought little more of it, had not the pain increased and her thumb begun to swell. This alarmed the housekeeper greatly. The nurse was fetched, the doctor was sent for, her hand was poulticed, and long before her usual time she was put to bed. The pain still continued, and although she fell asleep and dreamed a good many dreams, there was the pain always in every dream. At last it woke her up. The moon was shining brightly into the room. The poultice had fallen off her hand, and it was burning hot. She fancied if she could hold it into the moonlight, that would cool it. So she got out of bed, without waking the nurse who lay at the other end of the room, and went to the window. When she looked out, she saw one of the men-at-arms walking in the garden, with the moonlight glancing on his armour. She was going to tap on the window and call him, for she wanted to tell him all about it, when she bethought herself that might wake Looty, and she would put her into her bed again. So she resolved to go to the window of another room and call him from there. It was so much nicer to have somebody to talk to than to lie awake in bed with the burning pain in her hand, She opened the door very gently and went through the nursery, which did not look into the garden, to go to the other window. But when she came to the foot of the old staircase, there was the moon shining down from some window high up, and making the worm-eaten oak look very strange and delicate and lovely. In a moment she was putting her little feet one after the other in the silvery path up the stair, looking behind as she went, to see the shadow they made in the middle of the silver. Some little girls would have been afraid to find themselves thus alone in the middle of the night, but Irene was a princess. As she went slowly up the stair, not quite sure that she was not dreaming, suddenly a great longing woke up in her heart to try once more whether she could find the old lady with the silvery hair. If she is a dream, she said to herself, then I am the likelier to find her if I am dreaming. So up and up she went, stair after stair, until she came to the many rooms, all just as she had seen them before. Through passage after passage she softly sped, comforting herself that if she should lose her way it would not matter much, because when she woke she would find herself in her own bed with Looty not far off. But, as if she had known every step of the way, she walked straight to the door at the foot of the narrow stair that led to the tower. What if I should really, find my beautiful old grandmother up there? She said to herself as she crept up the steep steps. When she reached the top, she stood a moment listening in the dark, for there was no moon there. Yes, it was. It was the hum of the spinning wheel. What a diligent grandmother, to work both day and night. She tapped gently at the door. "Come in, Irene," said the sweet voice. The princess opened the door and entered. There was the moonlight streaming in at the window, and in the middle of the moonlight sat the old lady in her black dress with the white lace, and her silvery hair mingling with the moonlight, so that you could not have told which was which. "Come in, Irene," she said again. "Can you tell me what I am spinning?" She speaks, thought Irene, just as if she had seen me 5 minutes ago, or yesterday, at the farthest. "No," she answered, "I don't know what you are spinning. Please, I thought you were a dream. Why couldn't I find you before, great-great-grandmother?" "That you are hardly old enough to understand, but you would have found me sooner if you hadn't come to think I was a dream. I will give you one reason, though, why you couldn't find me. I didn't want you to find me." "Why, please?" "Because I did not want Looty to know I was here." "But you told me to tell Looty." "Yes, but I knew Looty would not believe you. If she were to see me sitting spinning here, she wouldn't believe me either." "Why?" "Because she couldn't. She would rub her eyes and go away and say she felt queer, and forget half of it and more, and then say it had been all a dream." "Just like me," said Irene, feeling very much ashamed of herself. "Yes, a good deal like you, but not just like you, for you've come again, and Looty wouldn't have come again. She would have said, no, no, she had had enough of such nonsense." "Is it naughty of Looty, then?" "It would be naughty of you. I've never done anything for Looty." "And you did wash my face and hands for me," said Irene, beginning to cry. The old lady smiled a sweet smile and said, "I'm not vexed with you, my child, nor with Looty either. But I don't want you to say anything more to Looty about me. If she should ask you, you must just be silent. But I do not think she will ask you." All the time they talked, the old lady kept on spinning. "You haven't told me yet what I am spinning," she said. "Because I don't know. It's very pretty stuff." It was indeed very pretty stuff. There was a good bunch of it on the distaff attached to the spinning wheel, and in the moonlight it shone like— what shall I say it was like? It was not white enough for silver. Yes, it was like silver, but shone grey rather than white, and glittered only a little. And the thread the old lady drew out from it was so fine that Irene could hardly see it. "I am spinning this for you, my child." "For me? What am I to do with it, please?" "I will tell you by and by. But first I will tell you what it is. It is spider web, of a particular kind. My pigeons bring it from over the great sea. There is only one forest where the spiders live who make this particular kind, the finest and strongest of any. I have nearly finished my present job. What is on the rock now will be enough. I have a week's work there yet, though," she added, looking at the bunch. "Do you work all day and all night, too, great 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 grandmother?" said the princess, thinking to be very polite with so many greats. "I am not quite so great as all that," she answered, smiling almost merrily. "If you call me grandmother, that will do. No, I don't work every night, only moonlit nights, and then no longer than the moon shines upon my wheel. I shan't work much longer tonight." "And what will you do next, grandmother?" "Go to bed." "Would you like to see my bedroom?" "Yes, that I should." "Then I think I won't work any longer tonight. I shall be in good time." The old lady rose and left her wheel standing just as it was. You see, there was no good in putting it away, for where there was not any furniture, there was no danger of being untidy. Then she took Irene by the hand, but it was her bad hand, and Irene gave a little cry of pain. "My child," said her grandmother, "what is the matter?" Irene held her hand in the moonlight that the old lady might see it, and told her all about it, at which she looked grave. But she only said, "Give me your other hand," and, having led her out upon the little dark landing, opened the door on the opposite side of it. What was Irene surprised to see the loveliest room she had ever seen in her life! It was large and lofty and dome-shaped. From the centre hung a lamp as round as a ball, shining as if with the brightest moonlight, which made everything visible in the room, though not so clearly that the princess could tell what many of the things were. A large oval bed stood in the middle, with a coverlid of rose colour, and velvet curtains all round it of a lovely pale blue. The walls were also blue, spangled all over with what looked like stars of silver. The old lady left her and, going to a strange-looking cabinet, opened it and took out a curious silver casket. Then she sat down on a low chair and, calling Irene, made her kneel before her while she looked at her hand. Having examined it, she opened the casket and took from it a little ointment. The sweetest odour filled the room, like that of roses and lilies, as she rubbed the ointment gently all over the hot, swollen hand. Her touch was so pleasant and cool that it seemed to drive away the pain and heat wherever it came. "Oh, grandmother, it's so nice," said Irene. "Thank you, thank you." Then the old lady went to a chest of drawers and took out a large handkerchief of gossamer like cambric, which she tied round her hand. "I don't think I can let you go away tonight," she said. "Would you like to sleep with me?" "Oh, yes, yes, dear grandmother," said Irene, and would have clapped her hands, forgetting that she could not. "You won't be afraid, then, to go to bed with such an old woman?" "No. You are so beautiful, grandmother, but I am very old, and I suppose I am very young. You won't mind sleeping with such a very young woman, grandmother?" "You sweet little pertness," said the old lady, and drew her towards her, and kissed her on the forehead and the cheek and the mouth. Then she got a large silver basin, and having poured some water into it, made Irene sit on the chair, and washed her feet. This done, she was ready for bed. And oh, what a delicious bed it was into which her grandmother laid her! She hardly could have told she was lying upon anything. She felt nothing but the softness. The old lady, having undressed herself, lay down beside her. "Why don't you put out your moon?" asked the princess. "That never goes out, night or day," she answered. "In the darkest night, if any of my pigeons are out on a message, they always see my moon and know where to fly to. But if somebody besides the pigeons were to see it, somebody about the house, I mean, they would come to look what it was and find you." "The better for them, then," said the old lady. "But it does not happen above 5 times in 100 years that anyone does see it. The greater part of those who do take it for a meteor wink their eyes and forget it again. Besides, nobody could find the room except I pleased. Besides, again, I will tell you a secret. If that light were to go out, you would fancy yourself lying in a bare garret on a heap of old straw, and would not see one of the pleasant things round about you all the time." "I hope it will never go out," said the princess. "I hope not. But it is time we both went to sleep. Shall I take you in my arms?" The little princess nestled close up to the old lady, who took her in both her arms and held her close to her bosom. "Oh dear, this is so nice," said the princess. "I didn't know anything in the world could be so comfortable. I should like to lie here forever." "You may if you will," said the old lady, "but I must put you to one trial, not a very hard one, I hope. This night week you must come back to me. If you don't, I do not know when you may find me again, and you will soon want me very much. Oh, please don't let me forget." "You shall not forget. The only question is whether you will believe I am anywhere, whether you will believe I am anything but a dream. You may be sure I will do all I can to help you to come, but it will rest with yourself after all. On the night of next Friday, you must come to me. Mind now." "I will try," said the princess. "Then good night," said the old lady, and kissed the forehead which lay in her bosom. In a moment more, the little princess was dreaming in the midst of the loveliest dreams, of summer seas and moonlight and mossy springs and great murmuring trees and beds of wild flowers with such odors as she had never smelled before. But, after all, no dream could be more lovely than what she had left behind when she fell asleep. In the morning, she found herself in her own bed. There was no handkerchief or anything else on her hand. Only a sweet odour lingered about it. The swelling had all gone down. The prick of the brooch had vanished. In fact, her hand was perfectly well. Chapter 12. A short chapter about Curdie. Curdie spent many nights in the mine. His father and he had taken Mrs. Peterson into the secret, for they knew mother could hold her tongue, which was more than could be said of all the miners' wives. But Curdie did not tell her that every night he spent in the mine, part of it went in earning a new red petticoat for her. Mrs. Peterson was such a nice, good mother. All mothers are nice and good, more or less, but Mrs. Peterson was nice and good all more, and no less. She made and kept a little heaven in that poor cottage on the high hillside for her husband and son to go home to, out of the low and rather dreary earth in which they worked. I doubt if the princess was very much happier, even in the arms of her huge great-grandmother, than Peter and Curdie were in the arms of Mrs. Peterson. True, her hands were hard and chapped and large, but it was with work for them. And, therefore, in the sight of the angels, her hands were so much the more beautiful. And if Curdie worked hard to get her a petticoat, she worked hard every day to get him comforts which he would have missed much more than she would a new petticoat, even in winter. Not that she and Curdie ever thought of how much they worked for each other. That would have spoiled everything. When left alone in the mine, Curdie always worked on for an hour or two at first, following the lode which, according to Glump, would lead at last into the deserted habitation. After that, he would set out on a reconnoitring expedition. In order to manage this, or rather the return from it, better than the first time, he had bought a huge ball of fine string, having learned the trick from Hopper my Thumb, whose history his mother had often told him. Not that Hopper my Thumb had ever used a ball of string. I should be very sorry to be supposed so far out in my classics, but the principle was the same as that of the pebbles. The end of this string he fastened to his pickaxe, which figured no bad anchor, and then, with the ball in his hand, unrolling it as he went, set out in the dark through the natural gangs of the goblins' territory. The first night or two he came upon the nothing worth remembering, saw only a little of the home life of the cobs in the various caves they called houses, failed in coming up anything to cast light upon the foregoing design, which kept the inundation for the present in the background. But at length, I think on the third or fourth night, he found, partly guided by the noise of their implements, a company of evidently the best sappers and miners amongst them, hard at work. What were they about? It could not well be the inundation, seeing that had in the meantime been postponed to something else. Then what was it? He lurked and watched, every now and then in the greatest risk of being detected, but without success. He had again and again to retreat in haste, a proceeding rendered the more difficult that he had to gather up his string as he returned upon its course. It was not that he was afraid of the goblins, but that he was afraid of their finding out that they were watched, which might have prevented the discovery at which he aimed. Sometimes his haste had to be such that, when he reached home towards morning, his string, for the lack of time to wind it up as he dodged the cobs, would be in what seemed most hopeless entanglement. But after a good sleep, though a short one, He always found his mother had got it right again. There it was, wound in the most respectable ball, ready for the use the moment he should want it. "I can't think how you do it, mother," he would say. "I follow the thread," she would answer, "just as you do in the mine." She never had more to say about it, but the less clever she was with her words, the more clever she was with her hands, and she less his mother and the less his mother said, the more Curdie believed she had to say. But still he had made no discovery as to what the goblin miners were about. Chapter 13. The Cobbs's Creatures. About this time, the gentlemen whom the king had left behind him to watch over the princess had each occasion to doubt the testimony of his own eyes, for more than strange were the objects to which they would bear witness. They were of one sort, creatures, but so grotesque and misshapen as to be more like a child's drawings upon his slate than anything natural. They saw them only at night, while on guard about the house. The testimony of the man who first reported having seen one of them was that, as he was walking slowly round the house, while yet in the shadow, he caught sight of a creature standing on its hind legs in the moonlight, with its 4 feet upon a window ledge, staring in at the window. Its body might have been that of a dog or wolf, he thought, but he declared on his honour that its head was twice the size it ought to have been for the size of its body, and as round as a ball, but the face, which it turned upon him as it fled, was more like one carved by a boy upon the turnip inside which he is going to put a candle than anything else he could think of. It rushed into the garden. He sent an arrow after it, and thought he might have struck it, for it gave an unearthly howl, and he could not find his arrow any more than the beast, although he searched all about the place where it vanished. They laughed at him until he was driven to hold his tongue, and he said he must have taken too long a pull at the ale jug. But before 2 nights were over, he had one to side with him, for he, too, had seen something strange, only quite different from that reported by the other. The description the second man gave of the creature he had seen was yet more grotesque and unlikely. They were both laughed at by the rest, but night after night another came over to the side, until at last there was only one left to laugh at all his companions. 2 nights more passed, and he saw nothing. But on the third he came rushing from the garden to the other 2 before the house, in such an agitation that they declared, for it was their turn now, that the band of his helmet was cracking under his chin, with the rising of his hair inside it. Running with him into that part of the garden which I have already described, they saw a score of creatures, to not of one of which they could give a name, and not one of which was like another, hideous and ludicrous at once, gambolling on the lawn in the moonlight. The supernatural, or rather subnatural ugliness of their faces, the length of legs and necks in some, the apparent absence of both or either in others, made the spectators, although in one consent as to what they saw, yet doubtful, as I have said, of the evidence of their own eyes, and ears as well, for the noises they made, although not loud, were as uncouth and varied as their forms, and could be described neither as grunts, nor squeaks, nor roars, nor howls, nor barks, nor yells, nor screams, nor croaks, nor hisses, nor mews, nor shrieks, but only as something like all of them mingled in one horrible dissonance. Keeping in the shade, the watchers had a few moments to recover themselves before the hideous assembly suspected their presence. But all at once, As if by common consent, they scampered off in the direction of a great rock, and vanished before the men had come to themselves sufficiently to think of following them. My readers will suspect what these were, but I will now give them full information concerning them. They were, of course, household animals belonging to the goblins, whose ancestors had taken their ancestors many centuries before from the upper regions of light into the lower regions of darkness. The original stocks of these horrible creatures were very much the same as the animals now seen about farms and homes in the country, with the exception of a few of them which had been wild creatures, such as foxes, and indeed wolves and small bears, which the goblins, from their proclivity towards the animal creation, had caught when cubs and tamed. But in the course of time all had undergone even greater changes than had passed upon their owners. They had altered, that is, their descendants had altered, into such creatures as I have not attempted to describe except in the vaguest manners, their various parts of their bodies assuming, in an apparently arbitrary and self-willed manner, the most abnormal developments. Indeed, so little did any distinct type predominate in some of the bewildering results that you could only have guessed at any known animal as the original, and even then, what likeness remained would be more one of general expression than of definable confirmation. But what increased the gruesomeness tenfold was that, from constant domestic, or indeed rather family association with the goblins, their countenances had grown in grotesque resemblance to the human. No one understands animals who does not see that every one of them, even amongst the fishes, it may be with a dimness and vagueness infinitely remote, yet shadows the human. In the case of these human resemblance had greatly increased, while their owners had sunk towards them, they had risen towards their owners. But the conditions of the subterranean life being equally unnatural for both, while the goblins were worse, the creatures had not improved by the approximation, and its results would have appeared far more ludicrous than consoling to the warmest lover of animal nature. I shall now explain how it was that just then these animals began to show themselves about the king's country house. The goblins, as Curdie had discovered, were mining on, at work both day and night in divisions, urging the scheme after which he lay in wait. In the course of their tunnelling they had broken into the channel of a small stream, but the break being in the top of it, no water had escaped to interfere with their work. Some of the creatures, hovering as they often did about their masters, had found the hole, and had, with the curiosity which had grown to a passion from the restraints of their unnatural circumstances, proceeded to explore the channel. The stream was the same which ran out by the seat on which Irene and her king papa had sat as I have told, and the goblin creatures found it jolly fun to get out for a romp on the smooth lawn such as they had never seen in all their poor miserable lives. But although they had partaken enough of the nature of their owners to delight in annoying and alarming any of the people whom they met on the mountain, they were, of course, incapable of designs of their own, or of intentionally furthering those of their masters. For several nights after the men-at-arms were at length of one mind as to the fact of the visits of some horrible creatures, whether bodily or spectral they could not say, they watched with special attention that part of the garden where they had last seen them. Perhaps indeed they gave in consequence too little attention to the house. But the creatures were too cunning to be easily caught, nor were the watchers quick-eyed enough to descry the head, or the keen eyes in it, which, from the opening whence the stream issued, would watch them in turn, ready, the moment they should leave the lawn to report the place clear. Chapter 14. That Night Week. During the whole of the week, Irene had been thinking every other moment of her promise to the old lady, although even now she could not feel quite sure that she had not been dreaming. Could it really be that an old lady lived up in the top of the house, with pigeons and a spinning wheel, and a lamp that never went out? She was, however, none the less determined, on the coming Friday, to ascend the 3 stairs, walk through the passages with the many doors, and try to find the tower in which she had either seen or dreamed her grandmother. Her nurse could not help wondering what had come to the child. She would sit so thoughtfully silent, and even in the midst of a game with her would so suddenly fall into a dreamy mood. But Irene took care to betray nothing, what efforts Lootie might make to get at her thoughts. And Lootie had to say to herself, "What an odd child she is," and give it up. At length the longed-for Friday arrived, and lest Lootie should be moved to watch her, Irene endeavoured to keep herself as quiet as possible. In the afternoon she asked for her doll's house, and went on arranging and rearranging the various rooms and their inhabitants for a whole hour. Then she gave a sigh and threw herself back in her chair. One of the dolls would not sit, and another would not stand, and they were all very tiresome. Indeed, there was one would not even lie down, which was too bad. But it was now getting dark, and the darker it got, the more excited Irene became, and the more she felt it necessary to be composed. "I see you want your tea, Princess," said the nurse. "I will go and get it. The room feels close. I will open the window a little. The evening is mild, and it won't hurt you." "There's no fear of that, Lootie," said Irene, wishing she had put off going for the tea till it was darker, when she might have made her attempt with every advantage. I fancy Lootie was longer in returning than she had intended, for when Irene, who had been lost in thought, looked up, she saw it was nearly dark, and at the same moment caught sight of a pair of eyes, bright with a green light, glowering at her through the open window. The next instant something leaped into the room. It was like a cat, with legs as long as a horse, Irene said, but its body no bigger and its legs no thicker than those of a cat. She was too frightened to cry out, but not too frightened to jump from her chair and run from the room. It is plain enough to every one of my readers what she ought to have done, and indeed Irene thought of it herself. But when she came to the foot of the old stair, just outside the nursery door, she imagined the creature running up those long ascents after her, and pursuing her through the dark passages, which, after all, might lead to no tower. That thought was too much. Her heart failed her, and turning from the stair, she rushed along to the hall, whence, finding the front door open, she darted into the court pursued, at least she thought so, by the creature. No one happening to see her, on she ran, unable to think for fear, and ready to run anywhere to elude the awful creature with the stilt legs. Not daring to look behind her, she rushed straight out of the gate and up the mountain. It was foolish indeed, thus to run farther and farther from all who could help her, as if she had been seeking a fit spot for the goblin creature to eat her in his leisure. But that is the way fear serves us. It always sides with the thing we are afraid of. The princess was soon out of breath with running uphill, but she ran on, for she fancied the horrible creature just behind her, forgetting that, had it been after her such long legs as those must have overtaken her long ago. At last she could run no longer and fell, unable even to scream, by the roadside, where she lay for some time half dead with terror. But finding nothing lay hold of her, and her breath beginning to come back, she ventured at length to get half up and peer anxiously about her. It was now so dark she could see nothing. Not a single star was out. She could not even tell in what direction the house lay, and between her and home she fancied the dreadful creature lying ready to pounce upon her. She saw now that she ought to have run up the stairs at once. It was well she did not scream, for although very few of the goblins had come out for weeks, a stray idler or two might have heard her. She sat down upon a stone, and nobody but one who had done something wrong could have been more miserable. She had quite forgotten her promise to visit her grandmother. A raindrop fell on her face. She looked up, and for a moment her terror was lost in astonishment. At first she thought the rising moon had left her place, and drawn nigh to see what could be the matter with the little girl, sitting alone, without hat or cloak, on the dark bare mountain. But she soon saw she was mistaken, for there was no light on the ground at her feet, and no shadow anywhere. But a great silver globe was hanging in the air, and she gazed at the lovely thing. Her courage revived. If she were but indoors again, she would fear nothing, not even the terrible creature with long legs. But how was she to find her way back? What could that light be? Could it be? No, it couldn't. But what if it should be? Yes, it must be her great-great-grandmother's lamp, which guided her pigeons home through the darkest night. She jumped up. She had but to keep that light in view, and she must find the house. Her heart grew strong. Speedily, yet softly, she walked down the hill, hoping to pass the watching creature unseen. Dark as it was, there was little danger now of choosing the wrong road. And, which was most strange, the light that filled her eyes from the lamp, instead of blinding them for a moment to the object upon which they next fell, enabled her for a moment to see it, despite the darkness. By looking at the lamp and then dropping her eyes, she could see the road for a yard or two in front of her, and this saved her from several falls, for the road was very rough. But all at once, to her dismay, it vanished, and the terror of the beast, which had left her the moment she began to return, again laid hold of her heart. The same instant, however, she caught the light of the windows and knew exactly where she was. It was too dark to run, but she made what haste she could and reached the gate in safety. She found the house door still open, ran through the hall, and, without even looking into the nursery, bounded straight up the stair, and the next, then turning to the right, ran through the long avenue of silent rooms, and found her way at once to the door at the foot of the tower. When first the nurse missed her, she fancied she was playing her a trick, and for some time took no trouble about her. But at last, getting frightened, she had begun to search. When the princess entered, the whole household was hither and thither over the house, hunting for her. A few seconds after she reached the stair of the tower, they had even begun to search the neglected rooms, in which they would never have thought of looking had they not already searched every other place they could think of in vain. But by this time she was knocking at the old lady's door. Chapter 15. Woven and then spun. "Come in, Irene," said the silvery voice of her grandmother. The princess opened the door and peeped in. But the room was quite dark, and there was no sound of the spinning wheel. She grew frightened once more, thinking that, although the room was there, the old lady might be a dream after all. Every little girl knows how dreadful it is to find a room empty where she thought somebody was, but Irene had to fancy for a moment that the person she came to find was nowhere at all. She remembered, however, that at night she spun only in the moonlight, and concluded that must be why there was no sweet, bee-like humming. The old lady might be somewhere in the darkness. Before she had time to think another thought, she heard her voice again, saying as before, "Come in, Irene." From the sound, she understood at once that she was not in the room beside her. Perhaps she was in the bedroom. She turned across the passage, feeling her way to the other door. When her hand fell on the lock, again the old lady spoke. "Shut the other door behind you, Irene. I always close the door of my workroom when I go to my chamber." Irene wondered to hear her voice so plainly through the door. Having shut the other, she opened it and went in. Oh, what a lovely haven to reach from the darkness and fear through which she had come! The soft light made her feel as if she were going into the heart of the milkiest pearl, while the blue walls and their silver stars for a moment perplexed her with the fancy that they were in reality the sky which she had left outside a minute ago covered with rain clouds. "I've lighted a fire for you, Irene. You're cold and wet," said her grandmother. Then Irene looked again, and saw that what she had taken for a huge bouquet of red roses on a low stand against the wall was in fact a fire which burned in the shapes of the loveliest and reddest roses, glowing gorgeously between the heads and wings of two cherubs of shining silver. And when she came nearer, she found that the smell of the roses with which the room was filled came from the fire roses of the hearth. Her grandmother was dressed in the loveliest pale blue velvet, over which her hair, no longer white, but of a rich golden colour, streamed like a cataract, here falling in dull gathered heaps, there rushing in smooth shining falls. And ever as she looked, the hair seemed pouring down from her head and vanishing in a golden mist ere it reached the floor. It flowed from under the edge of a circle of shining silver, set with alternated pearls and opals. On her dress was no ornament whatever, neither was there a ring on her hand, or a necklace or carcanet about her neck. But her slippers glimmered with the light of that Milky Way, for they were covered with seed pearls and opals in one mass. Her face was that of a woman of 23. The princess was so bewildered with astonishment and admiration that she could hardly thank her, and drew nigh with timidity, feeling dirty and uncomfortable. The lady was seated on a low chair by the side of the fire, with hands outstretched to take her, but the princess hung back with a troubled smile. "Why, what's the matter?" asked her grandmother. "You haven't been doing anything wrong. I know that by your face, though it is rather miserable. What's the matter, my dear?" And she still held out her arms. "Dear grandmother," said Irene, "I'm not so sure that I haven't done something wrong. I ought to have run up to you at once when the long-legged cat came in at the window, instead of running out on the mountain and making myself such a fright. You were taken by surprise, my child, and you are not so likely to do it again. It is when people do wrong things wilfully that they are more likely to do them again. Come." And still she held out her arms. "But, grandmother, you're so beautiful and grand with your crown on, and I'm so dirty with mud and rain." I should quite spoil your beautiful blue dress." With a merry little laugh, the lady sprung from her chair, more lightly far than Irene herself could, caught the child to her bosom, and, kissing the tear-stained face over and over, sat down with her in her lap. "Oh, grandmother, you'll make yourself such a mess!" cried Irene, clinging to her. "You darling! Do you think I care more for my dress than for my little girl? Besides, look here." As she spoke, she set her down, and Irene saw to her dismay that the lovely dress was covered with mud of her fall on the mountain road. But the lady stooped to the fire, and, taking from it, by the stalk in her fingers, one of the burning roses, passed it once and again and a third time over the front of her dress. And when Irene looked, not a single stain was to be discovered. "There," said her grandmother, "you won't mind coming to me now?" But Irene again hung back, eyeing the flaming rose which the lady had held in her hand. "You're not afraid of the rose, are you?" she said, about to throw it on the hearth again. "Oh, don't, please!" cried Irene. "Won't you hold it to my frock and my hands and my face? And I'm afraid my feet and my knees want it too." "No," answered her grandmother, smiling a little sadly as she threw the rose from her. "It is too hot for you yet. It would set your frock in a flame. Besides, I don't want to make you clean tonight. I want your nurse and the rest of the people to see you as you are, for you will have to tell them how you ran away for fear of the long-legged cat. I should like to wash you, but they would not believe you then. Do you see that bath behind you?" The princess looked and saw a large oval tub of silver, shining brilliantly in the light of the wonderful lamp. "Go and look into it," said the lady. Irene went and came back very silent, with her eyes shining. "What did you see?" asked her grandmother. "The sky, and the moon, and the stars," she answered. "It looked as if there was no bottom to it." The lady smiled a pleased, satisfied smile, and was silent also for a few moments. Then she said, "Any time you want a bath, come to me. I know you have a bath every morning, but sometimes you want one at night too." "Thank you, grandmother. I will. I will indeed," answered Irene, and was again silent for some moments thinking. Then she said, "How was it, grandmother, that I saw your beautiful lamp? Not the light of it only, but the great round silvery lamp itself, hanging alone in the great open air, high up. It was your lamp I saw, wasn't it?" "Yes, my child, it was my lamp." "Then how was it? I don't see a window all round. When I please, I make the lamp shine through the walls, shine so strong that it melts them away from before the sight, and shows itself as you saw it. But, as I told you, it is not everybody can see it." "How is it that I can, then? I'm sure I don't know." "It is a gift born with you, and one day I hope everybody will have it." "But how do you make it shine through walls?" "Ah, that you would not understand if I were to try ever so much to make you. Not yet, not yet. But," added the lady, rising, "you must sit in my chair while I get you the present I have been preparing for you. I told you my spinning was for you. It is finished now, and I am going to fetch it. I have been keeping it warm under one of my brooding pigeons." Irene sat down in the low chair, and her grandmother left her, shutting the door behind her. The child sat gazing, now at the rose fire, now at the starry walls, now at the silver light, and a great quietness grew in her heart. If all the long-legged cats in the world had come rushing at her then, she wouldn't she would not have been afraid of them for a moment. How this was she could not tell. She only knew that there was no fear in her, and everything was so right and safe that it could not get in. She had been gazing at the lovely lamp for some minutes fixedly. Turning her eyes, she found the wall had vanished, for she was looking out on the dark, cloudy night. But though she heard the wind blowing, none of it blew upon her. In a moment more the clouds themselves parted, or rather vanished like the wall, and she looked straight into the starry herds, flashing gloriously in the dark blue. It was but for a moment. The clouds gathered again and shut out the stars. The wall gathered again and shut out the clouds. And there stood the lady beside her with the loveliest smile on her face and a shimmering ball in her hand, about the size of a pigeon's egg. "There, Irene, there is my work for you," she said, holding out the ball to the princess. She took it in her hand and looked at it all over. It sparkled a little and shone here and there, but not much. It was of a sort of grey whiteness, something like spun glass. "Is this all your spinning, grandmother?" she asked. "All since you came to the house. There is more there than you think. How pretty it is! What am I to do with it, please?" "That I will now explain to you," answered the lady, turning from her and going to the cabinet. She came back with a small ring in her hand. Then she took the ball from Irene's and did something with the ring. Irene could not tell what. "Give me your hand," she said. Irene held up her right hand. "Yes, that is the hand I want," said the lady, and put the ring on the forefinger of it. "What a beautiful ring," said Irene. "What is the stone called?" "It is a fire opal." "Please, am I to keep it?" "Always." "Oh, thank you, grandmother. It's prettier than anything I ever saw, except those of all colours in your... Please, is that your crown?" "Yes, it is my crown. The stone in your ring is of the same sort, only not so good. It is only red, but mine have all colours, you see." "Yes, grandmother, I will take such care of it. But," she added, hesitating. "But what?" asked her grandmother. "What am I to say when Lucy asks me where I got it?" "You will ask her where you got it," answered the lady, smiling. "I don't see how I can do that." "You will, though." "Of course I will, if you say so. But, you know, I can't pretend not to know." "Of course not. But don't trouble yourself about it. You will see when the time comes." So saying, the lady turned and threw the little ball into the rose fire. "Oh, grandmother!" exclaimed Irene. "I thought you had spun it for me." "So I did, my child. And you've got it." "No, it's burnt in the fire." The lady put her hand in the fire, brought out the ball glimmering as before, and held it towards her. Irene stretched out her hand to take it, but the lady turned and, going to her cabinet, opened a drawer and laid the ball in it. "Have I done anything to vex you, grandmother?" said Irene pitifully. "No, my darling, but you must understand that no one ever gives anything to another properly and really without keeping it. That ball is yours." "Oh, I'm not to take it with me? You're going to keep it for me?" "You are to take it with you. I fastened the end of it to the ring on your finger. Irene looked at the ring. I can't see it there, grandmother, she said. Feel a little way from the ring towards the cabinet, said the lady. Oh, I do feel it, exclaimed the princess. But I can't see it, she added, looking closer to her outstretched hand. No, the thread is too fine for you to see it. You can only feel it. Now you can fancy how much spinning that took, although it does seem such a little ball. But what use can I make of it if it lies in your cabinet? That is what I will explain to you. It would be of no use to you. It wouldn't be yours at all if it did not lie in my cabinet. Now listen. If ever you find yourself in any danger, such, for example, as you were in this same evening, you must take off your ring and put it under the pillow of your bed. Then you must lay your finger, the same that wore the ring, upon the thread, and follow the thread wherever it leads you. Oh, how delightful! It will lead me to you, grandmother, I know. Yes, but remember, it may seem to you a very roundabout way indeed, and you must not doubt the thread. Of one thing you may be sure, that while you hold it, I hold it too. It is very wonderful, said Irene thoughtfully. Then suddenly becoming aware, she jumped up, crying, Oh, grandmother! Here have I been sitting all this time in your chair, and you standing. I beg your pardon. The lady laid her hand on her shoulder and said, Sit down again, Irene. Nothing pleases me better than to see anyone sit in my chair. I am only too glad to stand, so long as anyone will sit in it. How kind of you, said the princess, and sat down again. It makes me happy, said the lady. But, said Irene, still puzzled, won't the thread get in somebody's way and be broken, if the one end is fast to my ring and the other laid in your cabinet? You will find all that arrange itself. I am afraid it is time for you to go. Mightn't I stay and sleep with you tonight, grandmother? No, not tonight. If I had meant you to stay tonight, I should have given you a bath. But you know everybody in the house is miserable about you, and it would be cruel to keep them so all night. You must go downstairs. I'm so glad, grandmother, you didn't say, Go home, for this is my home. Mayn't I call this my home? You may, my child, and I trust you will always think it your home. Now come, I must take you back without anyone seeing you. Please, I want to ask you one more question, said Irene. Is it because you have your crown on you that you look so young? No, child, answered her grandmother. It is because I felt so young this evening that I put my crown on, and I thought you would like to see your old grandmother in her best. Why do you call yourself old? You're not old, grandmother. I am very old indeed. It is so silly of people. I don't mean you, for you are such a tiny and couldn't know better. But it is so silly of people to fancy that old age means crookedness and witheredness and feebleness and sticks and spectacles and rheumatism and forgetfulness. It is so silly. Old age has nothing whatever to do with all of that. The right old age means strength and beauty and mirth and courage and clear eyes and strong, painless limbs. I am older than you are able to think, and look at you, grandmother, cried Irene, jumping up and flinging her arms about her neck. I won't be so silly again, I promise you. At least, I'm rather afraid to promise, but if I am, I promise to be sorry for it. I do. I wish I were as old as you, grandmother. I don't think you are ever afraid of anything. Not for long, at least, my child. Perhaps by the time I am 2,000 years of age, I shall indeed never be afraid of anything. But I confess I have sometimes been afraid about my children, sometimes about you, Irene. Oh, I am so sorry, grandmother. Tonight, I suppose you mean. Yes, a little tonight, but a good deal when you had all but made up your mind that I was a dream, and no real great-great-grandmother. You must not suppose I am blaming you for that. I dare say you could not help it. I don't know, grandmother, said the princess, beginning to cry. I can't always do myself as I should like, and I don't always try. I'm very sorry, anyhow. The lady stooped, lifted her in her arms, and sat down with her in her chair, holding her close to her bosom. In a few minutes the princess had sobbed herself to sleep. How long she slept I do not know. When she came to herself she was sitting in her own high chair at the nursery table, with the doll's house before her. So that's where we shall leave it tonight. We will be moving on to chapter 16 next time. And if I just see, there are 32 chapters in total in this story. So we're just about at halfway through. I hope you're enjoying it just as much as I am. Before I go tonight, let me just say hello to John Boy and Byron Brand Stepwise. Good to see you both in the chat. And hello to all of you who have been watching throughout. It's very much appreciated, and you are always very welcome to attend and listen. Next week we shall be on at the same time, 9 o'clock, to continue with The Princess and the Goblin. At some point in the next few weeks, I do hope to do maybe a video or a stream, and there's possible options there. One could be the a video on the ways in which George MacDonald influenced J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis's works, both thematically and with various characters and structures of narrative. Another one is a long time ago I promised to do a history of dragon slaying stream, and realizing that that's almost an impossible task to do in one stream, I would kind of took a back step from it. But perhaps we might do a more skirting over various issues and asking questions about the various mythologies, or exploring the ways in which the dragon slaying history can raise questions for us today. So taking some potted examples. We shall see. We shall see. But once again, I want to thank you for joining tonight. And with that, I hope whatever time of day it is, wherever you are, that God's grace and goodness would be with you. Bye for now.